Welcome to the show. Thanks for being with us another week. Hard to believe that March is almost to an end, and the weather sure hasn't seemed like it. Supposed to come in like a lion, go out like a lamb. It's staying like a lion for a while here, but we got a great show planned for you. Delegate Shawn Fluharty will be my guest later on in the show. We'll talk about the legislative session that just was, and maybe its own version of March Madness in Charleston. But first of all, we'll talk about some of our usual features. I'm going to start off with a quote this week, and it's my birthday, so I thought I'd use a birthday quote. And the quote is this. It comes from Sammy Hagar, well-known musician in American pop culture, and he says, "Every year on your birthday, you get a chance to start new." And I think that's a great quote, and I always try to do that. Every year on my birthday, I try to think about, what do I want to accomplish with this next year of my life? I, start off usually in the mornings by thanking God for giving me another year. Always happy to have another day, but let alone another year of life. And but I start thinking about, what do I want to do this year? Kind of reflect on the year that was, and say, what can I do better? What can I do differently? What do I want to change? What goals do I have? I try to do that a couple of different points during the year. New Year's Day, I always try to do that, and then again on my birthday, because it's a couple months into the year, and I have a chance to reflect on how I'm doing with things. So, great quote there, I think, from Sammy Hagar. But also want to wish happy birthday to Robin Posey, who shares a birthday with me, and whose daughter Erica tells me regularly watches the show. So, happy birthday to you, Mrs. Posey, as well. Something that's worth watching and keep an eye on is in Pennsylvania, just our neighboring state. There's a big gerrymandering issue going on. About a dozen Republican lawmakers filed legislation this week to impeach 4 Democratic state Supreme Court justices who ruled that the state's congressional map was unconstitutionally gerrymandered and replaced it with a new one. This back in January, the state Supreme Court ruled 5-2. There are 7 justices in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and 5 Democratic justices, 2 Republican, and went along party lines. That the congressional districts that were drawn in 2011 were so lopsided to benefit Republicans that it violated the guarantee of the free and equal elections. So the court gave lawmakers 3 weeks to draw a new map with Governor Tom Wolf, but imposed its own plan once they failed to reach an agreement. After 2 Republican appeals to the United States Supreme Court and a federal lawsuit have been unsuccessful in blocking the new map, now these Republican legislators have, introduced legislation to impeach 4 of the 5 Democratic Supreme Court justices in Pennsylvania. And so, again, that was just introduced this week. We'll keep an eye on that. One of the reasons that's so important is that as West Virginia's population continues to change, and we continue to unfortunately lose population, and when the 2020 census rolls around in just a couple of years, it's very possible that we could lose a congressional district and be reduced from 3 congressional districts in West Virginia to 2. And how those districts are drawn up will certainly undergo scrutiny, and depending upon which party is in control of the legislature at the time, that can affect things as well. So, that'll be very important to go from 3 potentially congressional seats in West Virginia to 2, and how that will be drawn. So that's one of the reasons I bring this up, is that this what's happening there in Pennsylvania very likely to be something that could affect how things go in West Virginia. Also, affect our area here. There's a lot of talk about whether the things will be drawn east, west, north, south, or some type of what we call snake districts, where it really doesn't make any sense, but it truly is drawn to benefit one party or the other. So we will certainly keep an eye on that. A lot of discussion in the news this week also in the aftermath of a woman being killed in Arizona when she was struck as a pedestrian by a self-driven car. These self-driven cars, are happening now. It's going on in Pittsburgh, and this particular vehicle in Arizona did have a backup, so to speak, human driver, but neither the car nor the human backup detected the pedestrian who was struck by the vehicle. And so now a lot of scrutiny out there about whether or not it's safe to have these self-driving cars. And the argument on the other side is, look, there are accidents every day involving cars being driven by humans, and that the technology and the automated cars are much more likely to detect something and stop in time, as opposed to a human who could be distracted or not paying attention or just not see someone. But this is going to bring this to the forefront very quickly. And in terms of legal liability, the standards are going to be the same as they are with respect to anything else, whether or not there was negligence involved, whether or not it was improperly designed, whether or not the human backup was negligent in some way. So all those things will be looked at, and the standards will likely be the same. But you also bring into some issues with regard to product design and things of that nature, as you might have seen a product liability case. So I think this will be interesting to watch and see what happens here. It hasn't been determined yet as of the taping of this show as to whether or not the pedestrian or the vehicle or driver were at fault. The authorities out there are still investigating that. But this is something that certainly interests me in my line of work as a lawyer to see how the laws are going to come down on this, how they may change or evolve over time. And that's one of the reasons that we have our courts is, to interpret the laws. And, there may even be some legislation that ends up being drafted as a result of that. That already happens in many states as to whether or not there has to be a human backup or not. Some states go one way, some go another. So that's something that I'm going to follow very closely. And if there are developing details on that, we'll certainly talk about them here on the show. We need to take a break. When I come back, I'll have with me my guest this week, Delegate Shawn Fluharty. Stay with us here on the Jamie Bordas Show.
Bordas and Bordas, fighting for justice.
Recommended by the highest authorities. Danoon Lumber.
It's like a bad one's coming. Yeah. Right?
Bordas and Bordas, fighting for justice.
Welcome back to the show. This is my favorite time each week when I have a guest with me. And my guest this week is Delegate Shawn Fluharty, who represents the 3rd District here in West Virginia in the House of Delegates. And Shawn, thanks for being here on the show.
Thanks for having me, Jamie, and happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much. Busy time for you. Just wrapped up, and now maybe it gets even busier. You're going to get back to your day job, so to speak, of being a lawyer. But, I alluded to earlier in the show, kind of its own version of March Madness and maybe even a little bit of February Madness there down at the Capitol. And but I think really exciting to me was seeing so many people who've never been involved in politics in any way getting involved and using their voice in the way that really our founders intended for it to be done, is for the people's voice to be heard, and that happened.
It was madness. It's an accurate depiction, but it was also historic. And I think we'll look back years from now and realize it was a pivotal moment in our state's history. And I think it's clear that this was people-driven. No politician should take any credit for what happened, given the situation. This was driven by the bottom up, by members, by the people who drive our school buses, who teach our students, and the general public who supported them every step of the way. And I think everybody had a part in this. But at the end of the day, it was people power, and I'm proud to be a part of it and be on the right side of history and support them through the process.
What was it like down there at the Capitol? I mean, on a typical session day, I mean, there's people milling around the Capitol that maybe want to come down and see the process, and lobbyists, people of that nature, and you can usually find a seat if you want to go sit in the gallery. I mean, it's usually not that tough, and much different picture down there.
It was the first time that the people surpassed the amount of suits that are usually in the Capitol. Usually everybody's walking around in a suit, and now we had actual people there, not just a bunch of lobbyists. And the galleries were full, the hallways were full, and on many days, out front of basically the governor's mansion, that was all full with people, and thousands upon thousands. I believe they were averaging almost 5,000 people a day coming through the turnstiles, and that's also an issue. It's the people's house. That's where it's their property. But yet we only had 2 entrances for people to get in. So people came down and waited in extremely long lines, and that's an issue that needs addressed going forward, that the public should be able to get into their building. And we had an issue with that, but we were able to overcome it, and they waited in long lines. And let's talk about how many people were there. 5,000 per day, not a single issue, not a single event, no need for the police to intervene. It was something to really be proud of as West Virginians.
sounds like Disney World, long lines but no real problems. But the difference, I guess, from Disney World is not everybody was happy. It wasn't the happiest place on earth. Maybe ultimately it was, but a lot of contention there, between parties involved, different members of the legislature, and a lot of holdup from things getting done, and people around the state are watching, saying, "Hey, when are my kids going to get back to school?"
Sure.
And when it looked like it was going to happen, it looked like the governor had cut a deal, ultimately with the teachers and their representatives, and then the House votes to pass the bill, giving the teachers and service personnel 5% raise, and then Senate leadership said, "No, wait a minute, we're not doing this."
Yeah. We passed it on the Wednesday, and under the rules, it could have gone over to the Senate that evening, and they could have taken it up. They refused to do so. So Thursday comes along. Everybody drives back down. They're waiting to see. Senate refuses to take it up. Friday, same thing. Refused to take it up, refused to put it in committee. They wait until Saturday evening to take it up in the dark of night. And then when they did that, they amended the bill that was agreed to with, I believe, 98 or 99 votes in the House, amended it to 4%, knowing full well that would never fly for anybody. So, I really saw that as really an obstructionist way of doing things. It wasn't democracy at work. And it was very frustrating to watch firsthand and see how Senate leadership was treating this situation that was near and dear to all West Virginians' hearts, because they wanted to get the kids back in school. So we had a situation where they prolonged the process. We had an agreement. The governor, for better or worse, he went in and made something happen and said, "We're going to get this done." An agreement was made. We had the administrators on board. We had virtually every single person in the House on board. When you have over 98 people voting for a piece of legislation, then it heads to the Senate and they're saying that it's not good enough, it really caused a lot of frustration and consternation amongst those who serve. But at the end of the day, we're able to prevail.
Shawn, one of the things that I observed from here in Wheeling as this was all going on was a number of legislators, including yourself, who utilized social media
Absolutely.
to keep constituents informed, people back home, as to what was going on. Really, I think the first real big issue in modern West Virginia politics where social media was such a factor.
It was a huge factor, and it was a way of what happens in Charleston a lot of people don't get to see. And even those down there, when they're there, they don't really understand what all is going on behind the scenes. And the ability to get on social media and have a Facebook Live where I'd have over 1,000 people tuning in, the amount of shares on videos, questionings on the floor that was able to take place and share with everybody, that really changed everything, the dynamics of this whole situation. In 1990, the last strike that occurred in West Virginia, you didn't have that. The average member was clueless as to what was going on. Now through social media, and social media can do a lot of great things, it can do a lot of bad things, but on this event in particular, we were able to keep people informed. And that, I saw that as a public servant, is what I see myself, being able to connect with them directly and using social media. And my delegate Facebook page was shared many thousands of times, many views, so that people can be informed. I had everybody reaching out to me asking me, what's next? So I thought it was great for me to get on Facebook and say, here's what's happening, here's what I expect to happen next, and what you need to be doing back home.
The other thing that I think it allowed for was some of the folks around the state, in fact, many folks around the state, to see what actually happens on the floor, to see the passion with which you made some arguments and question some of the other legislators, and how that process works, and how sometimes leadership wants to shut you down because they don't like what's being said. But you're a guy that it was evident from watching some of those speeches that you're going to stand your ground. You're going to say what you believe, and you're not worried about who you may or may not offend. You're going to say what's on your mind, and I think people got a taste of that in watching those videos.
I know my district. I know the people back here, and I wasn't elected to just go down there and make a bunch of friends. And I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about doing what's right and being vocal about what I believe in, and really just calling them out when all the shenanigans are going on. And that was what was happening with the situation. And when we got towards the end of session, in particular when I was questioning the Senate Education Chairman on the shenanigans going on involving the Conferee Committee, it was clear to me, and I think everybody was able to see it through my questioning, that there was a plan in place. And it wasn't to help anybody, it was to prolong this process. And I think I was able to kind of clear the path on what was going on and really just point out to them that we're not going to accept this. And a spark for that really was what happened here in Wheeling. The governor came up here and he was doing his statewide tour. He comes to Wheeling and tries to sell a bill of goods to the constituents here in Wheeling. They weren't having it. He brought up, oh, maybe we'll go back for special session. Maybe you should just get back in the classrooms. And I think people were offended by it. when somebody like Governor Justice, who on the first day of session said, we have all this money now, we have a surplus, and we're going to spread it out here and there, but by the way, you get 1%. And I think that sparked everything, because we had a billionaire governor who's a 1%er telling educators and school service personnel and state troopers, you're only getting 1%. And that started everything. We had a domino effect, and it really reached a real kind of climax here in Wheeling when he had his town hall, and the people weren't happy with what he was delivering.
We need to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue talking about things that have occurred in the West Virginia legislature, including legislation that Delegate Fluharty has been in favor of with regard to sports betting here in West Virginia. Stay with us on the Jamie Bordas Show.
We're Panhandle Cleaning and Restoration, and we're gonna save you. We've got it down to a science, an absolute state of art. We do it all, restoration, cleaning, and reconstruction. When disaster strikes, just pick up the phone. We're Panhandle Cleaning and Restoration, and we're gonna save you.
Don't forget to do your homework.
All right, Mom. Trick or treat.
Here you go. Happy Halloween.
For your home, for your life, for more than 50 years. Denoon Lumber.
Welcome back to the show. I've been speaking with my guest this week, Delegate Shawn Fluharty, who represents the 3rd Delegate District here in West Virginia, in the West Virginia Legislature. And, you know, we're talking about the session, but another big thing that came out of this year's session, Shawn, was sports gambling, and something that you've been a proponent of for quite some time. Went around the country looking after West Virginia's interest and investigating, you know, what could be done so that if the Supreme Court of the United States allows sports gambling in other states, West Virginia will be ready to go.
Yeah, I'm proud to see this legislation get across the finish line. 2 years in the making. First introduced it last session to kind of get the spark of communication on the issue, because I could see it coming down the pike, you know, as an attorney, how the court system works, and that the Supreme Court was going to speak on this issue. And once doing so, there's going to be a 50-state race to pass sports betting. We were able to be one of the first states to get it done and get across the finish line, which is kind of out of the ordinary for West Virginia. Usually everybody else does everything first, and then we jump in. But we got it done. We got it done with a lot of progress. We got it through the legislature with 77 votes in the House, which I was very proud of. I'm in the minority party, so anytime you see a piece of legislation that you're supporting gets 77 votes, that's pretty impressive. So I was happy to see it happen. And the way we did it, very bipartisan at the end of the day, and we got it through, and the governor let it become law. And we're going to see now it's in the Supreme Court's hands. As soon as they come back, which we believe could be April 2nd, we could have sports betting live in West Virginia maybe this summer.
There's been some discussion about folks wanting a special session called by the governor to talk about whether or not Major League Baseball, the NBA, should get, you know, a percentage of money to go toward what they call their integrity fund or something along those lines, to make sure that that there's not being anything improper being done that would influence the games, things of that nature. I mean, is that getting any traction at all?
It is not, and I'll credit that to my colleagues for not falling for these tricks by Major League Baseball and other professional leagues, because they don't deserve the money. You know, we're talking about 1% of the handle, which is the total bet. There would be many months where money would go to the leagues and not come to West Virginia. This is going to be West Virginia money, and 2/3 of it's going to come from people coming into the state and placing their bets, because in order to participate, you must place your bet in West Virginia. So we don't want to see that money leave West Virginia. Just like everything else we do in our state, everybody wants to have their hands in on it, and it's usually a special interest group. And I find it funny that Major League Baseball, which won't let Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame because he bet on sports, now they want to make money off of West Virginia for betting on sports. It's really very hypocritical.
You know, the thing I look at too is, I mean, we don't have any NBA teams here in West Virginia. We don't have any Major League Baseball teams, so it's not like people are going to, you know, that these athletes are around here and people can get to them, so to speak, or whatever. You know, there's no one here. I mean, you know, so, and also, I mean, what do we gain from giving them money? I mean, what's the benefit for West Virginia in giving it to Major League Baseball or the NBA? I mean, what do we get in return for that?
Not a thing. They're selling it as, well, we have to protect our current league structure. Shouldn't you be doing that already? It's not like people aren't betting. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's just all illegal right now. So they should be protecting the integrity of the game as it is now. And they're just using this as an excuse to try to take money from West Virginia. In other states, they're trying it elsewhere, but they're not being very successful. And I think in our state, for example, I think it's a credit to my colleagues for getting educated on it when I first introduced it. So we take it back 2 years, and you start the legislation process, and it starts gaining attention, and people understood what the integrity fee was. Had we not done that, maybe they could have gained traction in West Virginia, and they could have seen the 1% fee. But I don't think you're going to see it. I don't think you're going to see a special session. I don't think there's support for it, and for good reason. And if that would ever occur, I think you should go to our universities, like West Virginia University, West Liberty, Marshall, the schools where there may be bets placed inside of West Virginia on those universities. But beyond that, with no major league team, like you said, why would we ever do such a thing?
You know, this will only happen at the casinos. The betting's only be at the casinos and some of the local gaming parlors, things of that nature, restaurants that have machines in them are saying, hey, why not us too? And you know, there's been a lot of, you know, in the paper about that, things of that nature. Yeah. I mean, what was the rationale behind, hey, this has got to stick to the casinos?
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to stick to the casinos. They have the licenses. However, you can place bets anywhere in West Virginia on your phone. So if you're at a local restaurant or establishment, you can stay there and you can bet on sports through the app on your phone, which most betting takes place that way nowadays. So I think there was some confusion with our folks in those industries, but it's going to help them at the end of the day. When you look at the revenue generation that's going to be derived from sports betting, it's not by activity at the track. It's by people coming into West Virginia, going to our restaurants, staying there. My suggestion would be improve your televisions, get a good sound system. You're going to have people staying in your establishment to place bets on sports because they can do so on their phone. And that changes everything. I think everybody wins with the current bill.
Shawn, one thing before I have to let you go is, you know, you're on the ballot again this year. You know, primary in May, 2 delegate spots up. You know, there's, you know, 2 people running. You really don't have a contested election in the primary, but you know, in November you will have a contested race, as will all the delegates in the state of West Virginia be up for re-election. How do you think this last session, what's occurred, will affect things, you know, headed toward November?
Well, I think this past session was hectic, as we mentioned, but I think the 3rd District's been well represented. It's been a privilege to serve with Delegate Storch, and I'm looking forward to another campaign season. It just seems like yesterday we were elected, and now we have to go through all this again. But at the end of the day, I'm very confident in moving forward through May and November. And I know my district, I know my people, and who I represent, and I think at the end of the day, most of them would say, we appreciate what Shawn's been doing, and he's a good voice for us, and they'll hopefully re-elect me in November.
Well, certainly thank you for your service, and thank you for being here today on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jamie.
We need to take a break. When I come back, we'll be talking sports. Stay with us here on the Jamie Bordas Show.
Methods of fighting have changed through the years, but we still fight to win. Bordas and Bordas, fighting for justice.
Disasters happen. Pick the team that takes care of them all. Powered by offices in Wheeling, Morgantown, and Pittsburgh, Panhandle Cleaning and Restoration is ready to handle any size emergency at a moment's notice. We have the right people, knowledge, and equipment to respond 24 hours a day.
I'm Bob Huggins. When disaster strikes your home or business, tell your insurance provider you prefer the restoration company the Mountaineers call, Panhandle Cleaning and Restoration.
Welcome back to the show. It's time to talk sports and start off with the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have been busy in the free agent market here in the offseason, picking up 2 guys on the defensive side of the ball. First of all, linebacker John Bostic, who's been with the Colts previously, and then safety Morgan Burnett, who was with the Packers. And, you know, good pickups for a team that gave up 40-some points in their last game of the regular season to kind of focus on the defensive side of the ball. And especially, you know, Ryan Shazier has been ruled out for 2018. You know, I hope that he can get back to where he's walking it again and being able to get around. His goal is to play football again, and I hope that he gets to that as well. But he's ruled out certainly for the 2018 season. So picking up John Bostic, a good pickup. John Bostic, though, has also had some injury problems during the course of the last couple years. So the question will be, can he remain healthy and to be able to contribute to that Steelers defense? So, that'll be, he'll certainly, I think, be a productive player if his health will hold up. And then Morgan Burnett with the Packers, a very solid safety. Mike Mitchell gone from the Steelers here in recent weeks. So shoring up that defense, certainly a priority, and something I think we'll also see perhaps in the draft in the month of April. I'm eager to see what the Steelers do in the draft. A lot of talk about, will they draft a quarterback? Will they take Ben's ultimate replacement? I don't think they should. I think that they need to wait on that. They just took a quarterback last year. But, we'll keep an eye on that draft as it approaches and see what else happens in the offseason here with regard to free agency. But certainly the Steelers need to continue to focus on the defensive side of the ball. A lot of weapons on offense, but defense struggling. Speaking of professional sports, a lot of excitement again in golf last weekend as Tiger Woods was once again in the mix, tied for 5th at Bay Hill at the Arnold Palmer Invitational, and will now take a couple weeks off before the Masters. And I really think Tiger Woods is going to win a major this year, whether it be the Masters or whether it be the British Open. I think those are his two best bets. He knows the Masters course down there in Augusta very well. Has always played well there. It suits his game, his imagination. And the British Open, because it's so wide open. I mean, I've been to a British Open before. I went to Royal Birkdale back in 1998. I was in summer school in London. That's where Notre Dame actually holds its summer school for law school. So I took the train up and went to Royal Birkdale, and it was an unbelievable experience. I mean, the fans were loud. They're drinking the whole time, having a great time. But the courses there are much different. I mean, it's a wide open space. It's not the narrow fairways, and that suits Tiger's game because his driver isn't always on. And that's what ended up costing him toward the end of the round last week on Sunday when he went out of bounds on the par 5. We would have had a real chance to birdie that hole and stay in the mix, at least for the time being. But Rory McIlroy ended up kind of running away with it anyway. But I think Tiger Woods will get a major this year. WVU basketball, a lot of excitement. Of course, big win over Marshall to get to the Sweet 16. Now 3 of the last 4 years in the Sweet 16, which is quite an accomplishment to say you're one of the last 16 teams alive. And 2 of my Final Four picks gone last weekend, and Virginia and North Carolina couldn't survive the opening weekend. Just Kansas and WVU, my 2 Final Four picks that survived the first weekend, both my Big 12 picks. Of course, the Big 12 had 4 teams that advanced to the Sweet 16, so a big feather in the cap for the conference. And be an exciting remainder of the tournament here. I always like the Mountaineers' chances when they've got this type of lineup with the veteran guards and some big guys inside like Kanate. So let's go Mountaineers. Let's see what they can do. That's all the time that we have for this week. I really appreciate you all joining in. We'll see you again next week on the Jamie Bordas Show.